Nestled deep within the heart of the forest of Detour lay the ethereal city of Eloria, home of the woodelves. Eloria was an architectural marvel, seamlessly integrated with the towering trees and verdant foliage. Intricate walkways and bridges, crafted from living vines and sturdy branches, connected tree houses and platforms high above the forest floor. These structures, adorned with bioluminescent flowers and woven with enchanted vines, glowed softly, casting a serene light that illuminated the city's nocturnal beauty. The city's heart was marked by the great tree, an ancient behemoth whose trunk was wide enough to house an entire council chamber within its hollowed interior. This tree served as both a meeting place and a symbol of unity for the woodelves. Its branches stretched out like protective arms, sheltering the city beneath its canopy. Leading Eloria was the wise and revered Eldrin, a figure of immense respect among the woodelves. Eldrin's long silver hair and piercing green eyes spoke of centuries of wisdom and experience. He was often seen in deep meditation beneath the great tree, communing with the forest spirits and seeking guidance for his people. Alongside Eldrin was Leora, the city's chief healer. Her knowledge of herbs and potions was unmatched, and she spent her days tending to the sick and wounded, using her skills to heal both physical and spiritual ailments. Leora's gentle demeanor and nurturing presence made her a beloved figure among the woodelves. The daily life in Eloria was a harmonious blend of work and reverence for nature. At dawn, the city came alive with activity. Woodelves, agile and swift, moved gracefully through the trees, gathering fruits, nuts, and medicinal herbs. Their diet was primarily plant-based, supplemented by the occasional fish caught from the crystal-clear streams that meandered through the forest. The artisans of Eloria were known for their craftsmanship, creating exquisite weapons, tools, and garments from the natural materials around them. Their work was not just functional, but also imbued with intricate designs that reflected their deep connection to the forest. While life in Eloria was largely peaceful, it was not without its challenges. The woodelves faced threats from encroaching dark forces and had to remain ever vigilant. Patrols were regularly sent out to ensure the safety of their borders, and warriors trained diligently to protect their home. Despite these dangers, the community thrived on its sense of unity and purpose. Festivals and gatherings were common, celebrating the cycles of nature and the bond they shared with the forest. Songs and dances echoed through the trees, a testament to the enduring spirit of the woodelves. In Eloria, every day was a testament to the balance between work, nature, and the shared values that bound the woodelves together, creating a sanctuary of peace and resilience amidst the vast expanse of the forest of Detour. The woodelf archers, known for their unparalleled stealth and precision, guarded Eloria with an almost ethereal presence. Positioned high in the trees, they were nearly invisible to any who might wander into their domain. Their lookout towers, seamlessly integrated into the forest canopy, were crafted from living wood and camouflaged with foliage. From these elevated perches, the archers had a perfect vantage point, allowing them to see far and wide without being seen themselves. Clad in garments that blended with the greens and browns of the forest, the archers moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Their bows, crafted from the finest yew, were strung with silk-like threads that made no sound when drawn. The arrows, tipped with razor-sharp obsidian and fletched with feathers from sacred birds, were both deadly and silent. The archers themselves were trained from a young age, their eyes sharp as hawks and their aim unerring. They communicated with subtle hand signals and bird calls, ensuring that any threat was known and neutralized before it could come close to the city. Deep within Eloria lay a place of great reverence and tranquility, the sanctuary of the healers. This sacred space, nestled in a grove of ancient oaks, was where the healers worked their miracles and offered their prayers. The grove was encircled by a crystal-clear stream, its waters believed to have healing properties. Small stone bridges arched gracefully over the stream, leading to the heart of the sanctuary. At the center of the grove stood the Temple of Ilaria, a structure built from white marble and adorned with intricate carvings depicting scenes of healing and renewal. Vines of fragrant jasmine and blooming lilies climbed its walls, their blossoms adding a gentle perfume to the air. Inside, The temple was bathed in soft, diffused light that filtered through stained glass windows, depicting the forest's gods and spirits. The floor of the temple was a mosaic of polished stones, each one imbued with healing energies. Around the edges of the room, low benches and cushions were arranged for those who came seeking solace and aid. In the center, an altar carved from a single piece of ancient oak stood as the focal point. Upon it, bowls of sacred herbs, crystals, and healing salves were meticulously arranged. The healers, led by Leora, moved with quiet purpose, their hands glowing with a soft, warm light as they tended to the sick and injured. Their prayers, spoken in the ancient tongue of the woodelves, filled the air with a soothing melody, invoking the blessings of the forest spirits. Here, in this holy place, the balance between body, mind, and spirit was restored, and the healer's tireless work ensured that Eloria remained a sanctuary of peace and vitality. High in the trees, a woodelf guard's keen eyes caught the glint of metal moving through the forest below. He narrowed his gaze, watching the approaching figures. Recognizing the group, he descended swiftly and silently to inform his superiors. Within moments, Eloria transformed from a tranquil sanctuary into a fortress of protection. Archers took their positions, arrows nocked and bows drawn. Hidden traps were activated, ready to spring upon any threat. The sanctuary of the healers was quickly fortified, with additional guards stationed at every entrance. The air grew tense as the woodelf community prepared to defend their home. Sir Alden approached the city with his party, leading them cautiously to the outskirts of the grove. He raised his hand in a gesture of peace, hoping to convey their intentions without words. The tension was palpable as the woodelf guards kept their bows trained on the newcomers. "We bring you back your son who has fallen in battle with the evil," Sir Alden said, his voice heavy with sorrow. 4 dwarves, their faces solemn, carried a coffin draped in the colors of the Iron Fist clan. Inside lay the body of Elian, once a proud member of the woodelf community. An anguished cry pierced the air. Elian! A woodelf, his face contorted with grief, pushed through the crowd. He glared at Sir Alden with a fury that burned hotter than any flame. "I told him not to join your forces, knight. This is your fault." The words hung in the air, a bitter accusation that deepened the already thick unease. The woodelf community watched, their eyes shifting between Sir Alden and the grieving father. Alden stood firm, his expression one of pained acceptance. The dwarves set the coffin down gently, their heads bowed in respect. The air grew heavy with a mix of sorrow and anger, the tension threatening to snap at any moment. Alden took a deep breath, his eyes meeting those of the woodelf father. "I am truly sorry," Alden said quietly, his voice breaking the silence but doing little to ease the tension. A hush fell over the gathering as the woodelf father's grief poured out in raw, unfiltered waves. The elves, dwarves, and knights stood still, each breath seeming too loud in the solemn silence. Alden felt the weight of their eyes on him, felt the collective pain of a community mourning a lost son. "I am truly sorry," Alden repeated, his voice steady but filled with genuine remorse. "Elian fought bravely, not for me, but for Lysaria. His sacrifice will not be forgotten." The tension was palpable. Whispers of anger and sorrow swirled around the clearing like a storm brewing. Elian's father, eyes wet with tears, clenched his fists at his sides. "This is your fault," he cried, his voice cracking. "You brought this upon us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A young elf stepped forward, his eyes burning with accusation. "Why should we, the woodelves, bleed for human wars? This battle is not ours." Others nodded, echoing his sentiment. "We should protect our own, not die for human quarrels." Alden took a step back, feeling the intensity of their words like blows. He opened his mouth to speak, but Torin beat him to it, his deep voice booming. "Enough." The dwarf's words cut through the air like a hammer striking an anvil. "Alden didn't come here seeking your dead. He came for allies, for those who value freedom over tyranny." Raelin, standing tall beside Thorian, added, "The Shadow King threatens all of Lysaria. His darkness will not stop at the edge of human lands. If he is not defeated, his shadow will consume us all, elf and human alike." An older elf, Leora, stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Our goals are the same. We all wish to see Lysaria free from the Shadow King's grip." Elian understood that. He gave his life for a future where all can live without fear. The fierce discussion raged on, voices rising and falling like the tide. Accusations were thrown, rebuttals made, until finally the clamor began to die down. The raw emotions slowly gave way to a begrudging understanding. "We are not so different," Marin spoke up, his voice soft but carrying through the silence. "We all want peace. We all want to protect our homes, our families. This is a battle for all of Lysaria, not just for humans or elves." Alden looked around, meeting the eyes of those who had shouted the loudest. "Elian's sacrifice will not be in vain. Together, we can honor his memory by standing united against the darkness." A moment of silence followed, the weight of the truth settling over them. The wood elf father, his anger now mingled with a deep sorrow, nodded slowly. The fierce discussions had run their course, leaving behind a tentative, fragile truce. The mood in the clearing quieted, the realization dawning on them all. Their paths, though different, led to the same goal. As the emotional storm began to subside, the gathered crowd seemed to collectively breathe easier. The shared understanding, though delicate, had planted a seed of unity. Torrin stepped forward, his expression softening as he addressed them once more. "Let us honor Elian not just with words, but with our actions. We must forge a new alliance, one based on mutual respect and a shared vision for a free Lysaria." Raelin nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "The strength of our unity will be our greatest weapon against the Shadow King. Let us not forget that." Slowly, the elves, dwarves, and humans began to mingle, exchanging quiet words and solemn nods. The initial hostility was replaced by a burgeoning camaraderie, each member of the gathering realizing the importance of their collective strength. Marin approached Alden, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We will make it through this, Alden, together." Alden gave a small, grateful smile, feeling the hope rekindling within him. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time, it felt possible. As the night wore on, plans were made and strategies discussed. The clearing, once a place of grief and accusation, transformed into a space of resolve and determination. The alliance, though still in its infancy, began to take shape, driven by the shared desire to see Lysaria free from the Shadow King's tyranny. And so, with the dawn of a new day, they stood united, ready to face the darkness together. The father's anger flickered, a brief crack in his resolve. He glanced at the coffin, the vibrant colors stark against the somber mood. His lips trembled, the fight draining out of him as sorrow overtook his rage. The other elves, sensing his inner turmoil, lowered their weapons, their expressions softening in empathy. Leora, the healer, stepped forward, her presence a calming balm. "Elian's spirit is with us," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on the father's shoulder. "He is part of our legacy now, his bravery and sacrifice a testament to our strength and unity." The father's shoulders slumped, the tension leaving his body. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "He was always so brave," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Too brave for his own good." Alden stepped closer, extending a hand. "Elian's bravery has given us hope," he said. "We stand united because of him." The father hesitated, then clasped Alden's hand, the gesture bridging the gap between them. The crowd released a collective breath, the unease lifting as the moment of understanding settled over them. The elves lowered their bows, and the atmosphere shifted from one of confrontation to one of solidarity. "We must honor Elian's memory by continuing to fight for what he believed in," Alden continued, addressing the gathered crowd. "Together we can restore Lysaria and bring an end to the darkness that threatens us all." Leora nodded in agreement. "Let us prepare a proper ceremony for Elian. We will celebrate his life and his contributions to our cause." The father, still holding Alden's hand, looked around at his fellow elves, his grief now tempered by a sense of purpose. "Elian's spirit will guide us," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We will honor him by standing together, stronger than ever." As the elves and dwarves began to organize the ceremony, a sense of unity and resolve settled over Eloria. The unease that had gripped them moments before was replaced with a shared determination to continue the fight for Lysaria's future. The elder elf, tall and stern, glared at Alden. His voice, dripping with disdain, cut through the tense silence. "So what do you want, knight? And you, mage? More elven blood?" Alden looked at the ground, the weight of guilt pressing down on him. "I don't want any blood," he began, his voice steady yet tinged with sorrow. "I just want to defend our world." Raelin stepped forward, his eyes meeting the elders. "The Shadow King has returned," he said, his tone grave. "You all know what that means." A murmur of emotion and fear rippled through the assembled elves. Faces turned pale, eyes widened in alarm. The elders' stern demeanor wavered, replaced by a flicker of dread. "The Shadow King," one of the younger elves whispered, his voice trembling. "But it means darkness will consume us all if we don't stand together," Raelin interrupted, his voice firm and resolute. "We've seen what he can do. Entire villages burned, children taken. We can't let it happen again." The elder's gaze hardened once more, but his voice was softer. "And you think we can stop him? With what? Our arrows? Your swords?" Thorian, the blind mage, stepped forward, his presence commanding respect despite his lack of sight. "With unity," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "With the combined strength of elves, dwarves, humans, and mages, only together can we hope to defeat the Shadow King." The elder's eyes narrowed, studying Thorian's face. "You speak of unity, yet it was your kind who brought this darkness upon us in the first place." Thorian nodded, accepting the accusation. "Yes, mistakes were made, but now we have a chance to make things right, to protect all of Lysaria, including your home, Aloria." The elves exchanged uneasy glances, the fear in their eyes mingling with a glimmer of hope. Finally, the elder spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "We will listen to your plans," he said, his tone reluctant but yielding. "But know this, knight and mage, if you betray us, there will be no forgiveness." Alden lifted his head, meeting the elder's gaze with unwavering determination. "We seek only to save our world. We need your help, and we offer ours in return." The elder nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. The elves' fear remained, but now it was tempered with a resolve to fight. Together, they would face the darkness, united in their common cause. Alden and Raelin found a secluded corner of the wood elf village, the sounds of the bustling sanctuary fading into the background. The weight of their conversation hung heavily between them as they sat on a fallen log, feeling the ancient wood beneath them, a silent witness to their grave discussion. "Syrala," Alden began, his voice hushed, laden with the gravity of their situation. "She's the heir. The pendant. It's more than just a symbol. It's a beacon of hope, a lifeline for our beleaguered realm." Raelin nodded, his expression thoughtful as he traced the memories of ancient texts and prophecies. "The pendant of Syrala has powers we are only beginning to understand. It's tied to the very essence of Lysaria's ancient magic. With it, she can restore what was lost, rekindle the fading embers of our land's vitality." Alden's gaze drifted to the horizon, his thoughts miles away, traversing the storied past of Lysaria. The sentinels of the Vale once protected this land, their legacy of bravery and magic unmatched. But now, with the dwarves of the Iron Fist clan by our side, we might just have a fighting chance. Their strength and resilience echo the valor of the sentinels. "The sentinels were more than warriors," Raelin mused, his voice tinged with reverence. "They were guardians of balance. The dwarves, with their unmatched craftsmanship and unwavering loyalty, remind me of that same spirit. Together, we must embody that legacy if we hope to stand against the Shadow King, the true orchestrator of our despair." Alden clenched his fists, the gravity of their mission sinking in deeply. "And if the Shadow King wins?" Raelin's face darkened, the shadows of ancient fears crossing his features. "If the Shadow King triumphs, darkness will consume Lysaria. The land will wither, its magic corrupted to the core. Every creature, every soul will be enslaved or destroyed. The very essence of life as we know it will be extinguished, leaving only a barren wasteland in its wake." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Raelin's words settling over them like a shroud, the ambient sounds of the village a distant hum. "And then there's King Eric," Alden continued, his voice filled with bitterness and sorrow. "He's not just a tyrant, he's a puppet of the Shadow King. His reign of terror, his ban on magic, it's all part of a larger plan to weaken us, to make us vulnerable to the encroaching darkness." Raelin's eyes flashed with determination, a spark of the ancient magic he wielded. "We must be stronger than our fear, Alden. Syrala's pendant is a beacon, yes, but it is also a weapon, one that we must learn to wield with precision and purpose, a tool to carve our path to victory. Alden nodded, the resolve in his eyes matching Raelin's. For Syrala, for Lysaria, and for every soul that has suffered under Aric's rule, we must prevail. We fight not just for ourselves, but for the very soul of our land. Their conversation was a mixture of hope and grim determination, the path ahead fraught with danger, but also with the possibility of redemption and restoration. The future of Lysaria hung in the balance, and their resolve was the first step towards tipping the scales in favor of light. The woodelves, with their grace and reverence, invited Alden, Raelin, Syrala, Marin, and Thorian to a grand dinner in the heart of Eloria. The ancient trees seemed to hum with approval as the village prepared for the feast. Tables carved from the living wood of the forest were adorned with flowers and glowing orbs of light. The scent of roasted meats and fresh bread wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest floor. As they gathered, the elves offered their guests seats of honor, acknowledging the significance of their presence. Plates were filled, goblets were raised, and the atmosphere became a blend of celebration and somber reflection. The food was exquisite, each bite a testament to the elves' deep connection with nature. The wine, made from the finest forest fruits, flowed freely, loosening tongues and lifting spirits. Laughter rang out as stories of old were shared, tales of bravery and unity, of the sentinels of the Vale and the ancient bonds between races. Yet, amid the joy, there was also mourning. Elian's death cast a shadow over the evening, a reminder of the cost of their struggle. The woodelf, who had blamed Alden for his son's death, now sat beside him, their grief a silent bond that needed no words. The night wore on, the firelight casting flickering shadows on the gathered faces. They drank to the memory of the fallen and to the hope of a brighter future. The bond between the party and the elves strengthened, a shared resolve growing with each passing moment. When the last of the wine had been drunk and the embers of the fire began to fade, the guests were led to their sleeping quarters. The elves had prepared soft beds woven from moss and leaves, nestled within the trees themselves. Exhausted but content, they settled down, the sounds of the forest lulling them into a deep, restful sleep. Morning arrived, heralded by the gentle light of dawn filtering through the dense canopy of the forest. The wood elves, ever vigilant and purposeful, were already awake, tending to their tasks with practiced ease. As the party gathered, the elder elf approached Raelin with a measured stride. "You must return to Shadowspire," he said, his voice brimming with quiet determination and authority. "In 5 days' time, I will send you aid. Our finest archers, skilled healers, and powerful druids will come to your assistance. Together, we will fight to save Lysaria." Raelin nodded, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and unwavering resolve. "Thank you, friend. We will await your arrival with anticipation." The elder placed a reassuring hand on Raelin's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and shared purpose. "Go now. We will see each other again, and when we do, it will be to reclaim our land." With those words, the party began their preparations to leave, their hearts bolstered by the promise of the wood elves' formidable support. The journey back to Shadowspire awaited them, and with it, the next pivotal chapter in their relentless fight for the future of Lysaria. Within the fortified walls of Shadowspire Keep, the air buzzed with an intensity that had become the new norm. The stone halls echoed with the sounds of clanging metal and hurried footsteps. Blacksmiths and enchanters worked tirelessly in the forge, their hammers striking rhythmically against glowing steel. Torin oversaw the production, his keen eyes ensuring each weapon and piece of armor met the highest standards. The blacksmith's fire roared, casting flickering shadows on the walls as molten metal was shaped and tempered. Enchanters muttered incantations, their hands weaving intricate spells into the weapons, infusing them with protective and offensive magic. A sword, once ordinary, now shimmered with an ethereal light, ready to cut through the darkness that threatened Lysaria. In the central courtyard, knights and villagers alike trained with unwavering determination. Sir Alden, despite the weariness etched on his face, led the drills. He moved with precision, demonstrating combat techniques and overseeing sparring matches. Each swing of his blade, each block and parry, was a lesson in discipline and readiness. Marin, having recovered from the earlier battle, practiced alongside the knights. His progress was swift, his movements increasingly fluid and powerful. Alden watched with a mixture of pride and concern, aware of the young man's potential and the burden that came with it. In a secluded chamber, Thorian and Raelin pored over ancient texts and maps. The discovery of the Knights of the Vale's sacred burial grounds had reignited their hope. Thorian traced his fingers over the worn parchment, deciphering runes and annotations. Meanwhile, Syrala and Raelin sat in deep meditation, their energies intertwined. Raelin guided Syrala through advanced magical practices, her voice calm and steady. Focus, Syrala. Feel the magic within you. Let it flow through the pendant and into the world. Syrala's pendant glowed softly, resonating with her growing power. The light it emitted was a beacon of hope, a sign of the ancient magic slowly being restored to Lysaria. As Syrala concentrated, she felt a surge of energy, a connection to the land and its people. Outside, the fortifications continued to rise. Wooden palisades were reinforced with stone, and traps were set at strategic points. Scouts returned with reports, their faces grim but resolute. The enemy was gathering, and Shadowspire needed to be ready. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the keep, a sense of purpose permeated every corner of Shadowspire. They were preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of their world, each person contributing to the collective effort, bound by a shared destiny. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Shadowspire Keep. Positioned on a rocky outcrop, the ancient fortress overlooked the dense forest below, its natural vantage point offering a significant strategic advantage. The steep cliffs surrounding the keep on three sides formed an almost impenetrable barrier, with the only access being a narrow, winding path leading to the main gate. Thick, high stone walls, reinforced with ancient enchantments, rose imposingly, prepared to withstand both physical and magical assaults. Guard towers, spaced evenly along the perimeter, bristled with archer slits and mounted ballistae. From these elevated positions, defenders could rain arrows and bolts upon any approaching enemy, ensuring a deadly reception for intruders. Each tower was manned by vigilant sentinels who peered into the encroaching darkness, ever alert for signs of movement. The main gate itself was a masterpiece of fortification. Reinforced oak gates bound with iron stood guard, flanked by defensive towers. Within the gatehouse, a murder hole allowed defenders to pour boiling oil or hurl projectiles onto attackers. A portcullis, ready to be lowered at a moment's notice, added another layer of security. The iron latticework of the portcullis glowed faintly with runes, hinting at the enchantments woven into its very metal. In front of the gate lay a dry moat, filled with sharpened stakes, designed to slow and injure any attackers who managed to reach it. A retractable bridge spanned the moat, easily raised to cut off access during an assault. The inner courtyard was a maze of defensive walls and choke points, creating a series of killing zones that would force attackers to fight through multiple layers of defense. Each choke point was strategically placed to maximize the defenders, turning every corner into a potential trap. Inside the keep, around 300 soldiers stood ready. Among them were 150 heavy infantry, armored knights, and foot soldiers armed with swords, shields, spears, and halberds. These warriors were stationed along the walls and within the courtyard, prepared to repel any breach. Supporting them were 100 archers, skilled longbowmen and crossbowmen, equipped to unleash volleys of arrows and bolts from the safety of the walls and towers. Their quivers were filled, and their bows and crossbows were strung tight, ready to rain death upon any who dared approach. 50 specialists, including engineers, sappers, and blacksmiths, worked tirelessly to maintain the fortifications, repair weapons, and deploy defensive traps. Their expertise was crucial in ensuring that Shadowspire Keep remained a formidable bastion against any assault. Each specialist knew their role well, and their efforts ensured that every defense mechanism was in perfect working order. The keep's artillery, consisting of ballistae and mangonels, added to its defensive might. Mounted on the walls and towers, the ballistae were capable of firing large bolts to break enemy formations or destroy siege equipment. The mangonels, positioned on the inner wall, could hurl stones or incendiary devices at attackers from a distance, adding another layer of deadly defense. The artillery crews were well drilled, their movements precise as they prepared their formidable machines for action. As night fell, the defenders of Shadowspire Keep continued their preparations. Training drills and fortification enhancements were conducted regularly to maintain readiness and morale. The soldiers, mages, and dwarves who called the keep home knew the importance of their stronghold in the fight against King Eric's oppressive rule, and their spirits were bolstered by the knowledge that they were the last line of defense against tyranny. Shadowspire Keep, with its strategic location, formidable defenses, and determined garrison, stood as a beacon of hope in a land shrouded in darkness. Its ancient walls whispered tales of past glories and hinted at the promise of future victories. The keep's spirit was palpable, a fortress of stone and will, ever ready to stand against the encroaching night. Thorian, his weathered face set in a mask of concentration, stood at the heart of the war room. Around him, maps and scrolls lay scattered across the stone table, illuminated by flickering torchlight. Raelin and Marilyn flanked him, their expressions mirroring his intensity. Syrala, her face pale but determined, listened intently as Thorian outlined their next steps. "We must bolster the defenses at the northern wall," Thorian said, his voice steady. "The Shadow King's forces will likely attack there first, trying to breach our weakest point." Raelin nodded. "I'll lead a team of mages to reinforce the enchantments. We can use the ancient runes we discovered in the library." Syrala's pendant glowed softly, casting a warm light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She glanced at Marin, who stood beside her, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'll help with the enchantments. The pendant's power can amplify the magic." Thorian's sightless eyes turned towards her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Your courage is admirable, Syrala. We will need every bit of your strength." Sir Alden, his armor glinting in the torchlight, stepped forward. "My knights and I will hold the main gate. If the Shadow King's forces manage to breach the walls, we'll be ready to push them back." Torin, standing beside Alden, stroked his beard thoughtfully. "The dwarves will handle the siege weapons. We've set traps and prepared defenses that should slow them down. We'll give them a fight they won't forget." The room buzzed with the urgency of their preparations. Knights and dwarves moved in and out, delivering reports and receiving orders. Outside, the storm raged on, the howling wind and driving rain adding to the tension. Marilyn placed a reassuring hand on Syrala's shoulder. "We'll get through this, together. Your power is our hope." Syrala nodded, her resolve hardening. She knew the burden she carried, the weight of Lysaria's future resting on her shoulders. But with her friends and allies beside her, she felt a flicker of hope. As the meeting concluded, the group dispersed to their respective tasks. Thorian lingered for a moment, his mind already turning to the next challenge. The fate of Shadowspire Keep, and indeed all of Lysaria, depended on their unity and determination. And with the storm outside as fierce as the one within their hearts, they prepared to face whatever came next. The village of Eldergrove lay nestled in a valley, a peaceful haven surrounded by lush greenery and vibrant fields. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the homes, but that serenity shattered as King Eric's battle group thundered down the main road, a storm of iron and malice. The sound of galloping hooves and clanking armor sent a wave of dread through the villagers. They emerged from their homes, faces pale, hearts racing as they beheld the grim sight of soldiers, their dark banners fluttering ominously. "Get the children inside," a villager shouted, her voice tinged with panic. But it was too late. The soldiers surged forward, shouting orders and brandishing weapons. They rode through the village like a scourge, smashing windows and doors, their laughter mingling with the cries of terror. Flames erupted from the thatched roofs, licking the sky as fire consumed Eldergrove. The acrid scent of smoke filled the air, choking those who dared to resist. A group of villagers rallied, grabbing whatever makeshift weapons they could find. They rushed towards the invaders, desperation fueling their courage. "Protect our home!" one man yelled, wielding a pitchfork as if it were a sword. But the soldiers met them with brutal efficiency. Eric's guards, trained and ruthless, cut down the villagers with ease. The clash of metal rang out, a cacophony of despair as the villagers fell one by one. Children screamed as they were snatched from their mother's arms, pulled away to join the ranks of King Eric's prisoners. "Please, no," a mother cried, reaching out as a soldier yanked her child away, the boy's terrified face fading into the distance. The flames spread rapidly, consuming crops and homes alike. Eldergrove, once filled with laughter and life, turned into a nightmarish scene of destruction. The villagers fought valiantly, but the odds were insurmountable. With every passing moment, hope slipped further away. The last of the defenders, battered and bloodied, realized the futility of their struggle. They staggered back, eyes wide with horror, as the fires raged, illuminating the night sky with a hellish glow. The battle group moved through the ashes, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake, a testament to King Eric's relentless tyranny. The screams of the captured children echoed through the night, haunting the air as the soldiers regrouped, their cruel laughter mingling with the crackling flames. News of Eldergrove's devastation reached Shadowspire Keep by dawn. The message was carried by a breathless scout, his face pale and eyes wide with horror. As the scout recounted the nightmarish events, Sir Alden listened in silence, his expression hardening with every word. When the scout finished, Alden turned away, staring out a narrow window overlooking the keep's courtyard. Below, knights and villagers moved with purpose, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded miles away. "They're trying to draw us out," Alden murmured, his voice a mix of sorrow and anger, "to divide our forces." Thorian, who had been standing silently by the fire, suddenly erupted in rage. His normally composed demeanor shattered. "So what? Are you going to let them destroy the villages?" His voice was a harsh accusation, echoing off the stone walls of the chamber. Alden closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the decision he knew he had to make. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant clamor of preparations outside. Torin, who had been sharpening his axe, looked up. "We can't just sit here, Alden. Those people need our help." Raelin stepped forward, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to protect them. If we let fear paralyze us, Eric wins without a fight." Alden turned to face them, his expression weary but resolute. "And if we spread ourselves too thin, we risk everything we've built here. Shadowspire is our stronghold, our last bastion against Eric's forces. We can't afford to lose it." Thorian stepped closer, his rage giving way to a cold, calculated intensity. "Then we need a plan that allows us to protect the villages without compromising our defenses here." Marin, who had been standing by Syrala's side, spoke up. "We could send a smaller, more mobile force to aid the villages. They wouldn't expect us to strike back so quickly." Alden nodded slowly, considering the suggestion. "A strike team, swift and precise. It might just work." Thorian's eyes gleamed with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'll lead them. We'll hit Eric's forces where they least expect it." Alden met Thorian's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "Then we move quickly. Every moment we delay, more lives are lost." With a sense of urgency, the group began to formulate their strategy, knowing that the fate of Lysaria depended on their next move. Far away, nestled between rolling hills and a sparkling river, lay the city of Shiladras, a gleaming jewel of commerce in Lysaria. The city's architecture was a blend of ancient grandeur and modern vitality, with white stone buildings topped with red-tiled roofs, sprawling marketplaces bustling with activity, and elegant bridges arching gracefully over the river. Merchant ships docked along the quay, their sails fluttering in the breeze as they unloaded exotic goods from distant lands, filling the air with the scents of spices and the chatter of diverse languages. The streets of Shiladras were paved with cobblestones, lined with vibrant stalls selling everything from silks and spices to finely crafted jewelry and rare artifacts. Fountains adorned with intricate sculptures gushed crystal-clear water, while lush gardens and tree-lined boulevards provided a serene escape from the bustling trade. The city's heart was dominated by the Grand Bazaar, a sprawling marketplace where merchants haggled and traders from across Lysaria converged, their voices creating a symphony of commerce and camaraderie. The city's fortifications were formidable, with towering stone walls encircling the perimeter, punctuated by watchtowers and heavily fortified gates. The walls were manned by vigilant guards, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble. Within the walls, the citizens of Chiladrus lived in relative peace and prosperity, confident in the strength of their defenses and the stability of their thriving city. That confidence shattered with the arrival of King Aric's main battle force. The once bustling gates of Chiladrus slammed shut as the alarm bells rang out, echoing through the streets. Aric's army, a sea of dark armor and crimson banners, surrounded the city, cutting off all routes of escape. The siege had begun, casting a shadow over the once vibrant city. The attackers wasted no time in isolating the city. They established a complete encirclement, blocking all roads and pathways leading to and from Chiladrus. A naval blockade was set up along the river, preventing any merchant ships from entering or leaving the port. Scouts and foraging parties spread out into the countryside, gathering resources and ensuring that no reinforcements could come to the city's aid. The once bustling trade routes fell silent, and the lifeblood of commerce was cut off. Siege engines were rolled into position, their menacing silhouettes casting long shadows over the besieged city. Trebuchets and catapults hurled massive stones and fiery projectiles at the walls, each impact sending tremors through the ground. Ballistae and Scorpios targeted the battlements, aiming to weaken the defenders' positions and create openings for a direct assault. The relentless bombardment shook the very foundations of Chiladrus as the defenders braced themselves for the onslaught. Inside Chiladrus, the mood turned grim. The vibrant markets fell silent, and the once bustling streets were now filled with anxious citizens and soldiers preparing for the worst. The city's leaders convened in the council hall, their faces etched with worry as they discussed strategies to hold off the siege. Food and water were rationed, and every able-bodied man and woman was called to aid in the defense. The spirit of the city, once buoyant with prosperity, now hung heavy with the weight of impending doom. Outside the city, Aric's forces continued their relentless bombardment. Miners worked tirelessly to dig tunnels beneath the walls, seeking to undermine the city's defenses. The sounds of picks and shovels echoed in the dark as the attackers aimed to weaken the foundations and bring down sections of the wall. The siege was not just a battle of strength, but a war of patience and attrition. As the days turned into weeks, the defenders of Chiladrus fought bravely, repelling wave after wave of assaults. But with each passing day, their resources dwindled, and the walls bore the scars of relentless attacks. The once proud fortifications now looked battered and worn, a testament to the ferocity of the siege. Inside and outside the city, the struggle for Chiladrus became a desperate battle of endurance, with the fate of its people hanging in the balance. The city's spirit, though battered, remained unbroken, a flicker of hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. In the darkest hours of the night, when the bombardment paused, the defenders could hear the distant howls of wolves and the crackling of fires outside their walls. The nights were long and filled with dread as the constant threat of a breach loomed over them. Children clung to their parents, seeking comfort in whispered lullabies, while the elderly prayed for a miracle. The city's once celebrated artisans and musicians now found solace in crafting makeshift weapons and fortifying barricades, and with their hands turning to tasks of survival rather than art. The council hall, which had once been a place of governance and celebration, became a war room where maps and plans were strewn across tables. The question was no longer if they could repel the invaders, but how long they could hold out. Every day, messengers brought news of dwindling supplies and rising casualties, yet the resolve of the defenders did not waver. The siege of Chiladrus was a testament to the resilience of its people. Thorian raged with fury, his voice echoing through the stone halls of Shadowspire Keep. "What? Now they attack the city of Chiladrus? This madness cannot continue." Alden, who had been seated by the fire, rose to his feet, his face set in grim determination. "You're right, mage. We can't stand and do nothing." Thorian's eyes blazed with a fierce resolve. "I will handle this," he declared, his tone brooking no argument. Alden stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You will do nothing for now. This requires careful planning and strategy." Thorian met Alden's gaze, the tension between them palpable. "Give me 2 guards," Thorian demanded, his voice cold and precise, "and have Raelin stand at my door. No one is to enter until I call for him. Alden nodded, recognizing the urgency in Thorian's voice. He motioned to a nearby squire, who hurried off to summon the guards and Raelin. Thorian turned on his heel, his robes swirling around him as he made his way back to his quarters. The fury that had fueled his outburst was now channeled into a determined focus. The attack on Chiladros was a clear escalation, and it demanded a swift and decisive response. As he entered his quarters, Thorian's mind raced with possibilities. The dark forces aligned with King Eric were growing bolder, their reach extending further than he had anticipated. He needed to delve into his extensive knowledge of ancient magic and strategies to find a way to counter this new threat. The two guards arrived, their armor clinking softly as they took their positions outside Thorian's door. Raelin followed shortly after, his expression one of concern and curiosity. He took his place beside the door, ready to respond the moment Thorian called for him. Inside, Thorian began to gather the tools and texts he would need. Ancient tomes filled with arcane knowledge, enchanted artifacts that held untapped power, and scrolls containing forgotten spells were spread out before him. He would need every bit of his considerable skill and wisdom to formulate a plan that could save Chiladros and turn the tide against King Eric's dark forces. As the minutes ticked by, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Thorian's shoulders. But he welcomed it, knowing that the fate of Lysaria depended on their next moves. Thorian sat cross-legged in the dimly lit room, his eyes closed and his breathing steady. Outside, the siege of Chiladros continued, the distant sounds of battle and the cries of the wounded a constant reminder of the stakes. The village, too, suffered under King Eric's wrath. Flames licked at thatched roofs, and the wails of its people filled the night air as their homes and lives were consumed by fire. Inside the room, a profound silence enveloped Thorian. He focused inward, tapping into the vast reservoir of his magical abilities. The air around him shimmered with energy as he reached deeper, seeking a connection beyond the physical realm. He envisioned the Sentinel Shrine, a place of ancient power and forgotten wisdom. The shrine stood as a beacon of hope and strength in Lysaria's darkest times. Thorian's mind extended, bridging the gap between the present and the mystical past. The connection formed, subtle at first, then growing stronger. Thorian felt the presence of the entity that resided within the shrine, a guardian spirit of immense power. They communicated not with words, but through an ancient telepathic bond. Thoughts and emotions flowed between them, a dialogue of pure essence. The entity's consciousness enveloped Thorian, a force both comforting and overwhelming. In this shared mental space, they spoke in the old magical tongues, their meanings clear despite the lack of spoken language. Thorian conveyed the dire situation, the desperation of Chiladros, and the suffering of the village's people. The guardian spirit, sensing Thorian's urgency and the righteousness of his cause, responded with a powerful surge of understanding. It roared, a sound that resonated through the very fabric of reality. "You will have what you seek, Thorian, great mage." The words, though unspoken, echoed with a promise of aid and strength. Thorian felt the entity's power flowing into him, bolstering his resolve and filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. With the connection still humming in his mind, Thorian opened his eyes, the room around him glowing with the faint light of his magic. He knew that the entity's support would be crucial in the battles to come, and he felt a deep gratitude for the ancient guardian's trust. He rose from his meditation, ready to rejoin the others and share the hope that now burned brightly within him. Raelin approached Sir Alden, his expression as steady as a mountain, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of countless years. Torrin stood beside him, his stout figure radiating determination. Alden's brow furrowed as he absorbed the information. "You trust him with this?" Raelin nodded. "With my magic and his expertise, the city stands a better chance. But the village of Eldergrove needs your immediate help. Ride out, Alden. The villagers are defenseless against Eric's forces." Alden hesitated, glancing between Raelin and Torrin. The weight of their decision pressed heavily upon him. His loyalty to both the city and the village warred within him, but the conviction in Raelin's voice was undeniable. "Very well," Alden said, his voice firming with resolve. "I'll lead my riders to Eldergrove. We'll save as many as we can." Raelin placed a hand on Alden's shoulder. "Go swiftly, my friend. Time is of the essence." Alden turned, his cape swirling behind him as he strode to his waiting horse. He mounted with practiced ease and signaled his riders to gather. The knights, their faces set with grim determination, fell into formation behind him. "To Eldergrove," Alden commanded, raising his sword high, "for Lysaria and its people." The horses surged forward, their hooves pounding against the earth in a rhythmic cadence. Dust rose in their wake as they sped toward the village, a cloud of urgency and hope. Alden led the charge, his mind focused on the task ahead. The thought of the villagers, their homes burning and their lives in peril, spurred him onward. The riders, a mix of seasoned knights and eager squires, followed without hesitation. Their loyalty to Alden and the cause was unwavering. As they galloped through the forest, the sound of their passage echoed through the trees, a promise of aid to those who needed it most. Raelin watched them disappear into the distance, his heart heavy yet hopeful. He turned to Torin, who was already barking orders to his dwarves, organizing their defenses for the siege. "We'll hold the line here," Raelin said, more to himself than anyone else. "Alden will save the village, and together we'll turn the tide against Eric." With a final nod to Torin, Raelin moved to his position, ready to unleash his magic upon the enemy forces besieging Shaladras. The battle for Lysaria continued, each step bringing them closer to the dawn of a new era. As Raelin prepared to unleash his magic, Torin focused on the ancient runes etched into the walls of Shadowspire Keep. His fingers traced the intricate patterns, his mind reaching out to the entity that had promised aid. His voice, low and resonant, carried through the chamber. "Great Sentinel of the Veil," Torin intoned, his words imbued with urgency and reverence. "We call upon your strength to aid us in this dire hour. Our enemies press upon us, and our people suffer. Send forth your warriors to break the siege and restore hope to Lysaria." The air around him thickened, charged with an otherworldly energy. The runes glowed brighter, casting an eerie light across the stone walls. A chill swept through the room, and the ground trembled beneath Torin's feet. A deep, echoing voice filled the chamber, reverberating through the very bones of the keep. From the shadows, spectral figures began to materialize. Clad in ancient armor, their eyes burned with an ethereal light. These were the undead warriors of the Vale, bound by duty to protect Lysaria even in death. Their presence exuded a sense of solemn power and unwavering resolve. Torin stepped back, his heart pounding with a mix of awe and anticipation. He had read the legends, but seeing the warriors in the flesh, or what remained of it, was a different experience entirely. These were the guardians of old, the sentinels who had once defended the realm with unmatched valor. The lead warrior, a towering figure with a crown of silver flames, stepped forward. His voice, though ghostly, carried authority. "We stand ready to serve. Lead us to the enemy, and we shall break their siege." Raelin joined Torin, his eyes wide with astonishment. "The legends were true," he whispered, barely able to contain his excitement. "With their help, we can turn the tide." Torin nodded, his resolve steeled by the presence of these ancient warriors. "Prepare the defenses," he ordered. "We'll strike as one, with the strength of the Vale at our side." The undead warriors moved with silent efficiency, their spectral forms gliding through the keep as they readied for battle. Torin and Raelin exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. The siege of Chiladras would soon face an unexpected and formidable force. With the undead army at their command, they marched toward the city gates, the spectral warriors leading the charge. The clash of steel and the roar of battle awaited, but with the sentinels of the Vale by their side, hope surged anew in the hearts of those who fought for Lysaria's future. The spectral army of the Vale surged forward, a wave of ethereal might that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality. As they advanced toward the besieging forces of King Eric, their forms shimmered in the dim light, a ghostly reminder of the ancient power they wielded. Torin and Raelin marched alongside the spectral warriors, their hearts pounding with determination. The air crackled with the energy of the undead sentinels, their presence sending chills down the spines of all who beheld them. The siege of Chiladras was about to meet an unexpected and formidable force. The besieging forces of Eric, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the spectral army, scrambled to form a defense. Panic rippled through their ranks as the ghostly warriors closed the distance with unnerving speed. A spectral knight, crowned with silver flames, led the charge. His blade, a weapon of pure energy, cut through the air with a sound like a distant thunderclap. He swung it with precision, cleaving through the front lines of Eric's soldiers. The men fell, their weapons clattering uselessly to the ground as they faced the unstoppable force of the undead. Torin, wielding his hammer with a strength born of desperation and hope, fought beside the spectral knight. His blows were precise, each strike aimed to disable and disarm. The dwarven warrior's eyes blazed with determination as he brought down foe after foe, carving a path through the chaos. Raelin, channeling his magic, sent bolts of lightning arcing through the air. The energy crackled and sizzled, striking down Eric's soldiers with unerring accuracy. His face was a mask of concentration, every ounce of his power focused on the battle at hand. The ground trembled beneath his feet as he unleashed the full might of his arcane abilities. The spectral army pressed forward, their relentless assault breaking the morale of Eric's forces. The soldiers, unable to withstand the combined might of the undead warriors and the defenders of Lysaria, began to falter. Fear took hold, and their lines broke, scattering in disarray. Within moments, the battlefield was transformed. The besieging forces of Eric, once confident in their strength, were now in full retreat. The spectral warriors, unyielding and relentless, pursued them, ensuring that none escaped unscathed. Torin and Raelin stood amidst the aftermath, their breaths heavy but their spirits unbroken. The siege of Chilidress had been broken, and the forces of Lysaria had emerged victorious. The spectral army, their duty fulfilled, began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air like mist in the morning sun. Victory belonged to Lysaria, and the defenders of Shadowspire Keep had proven their resolve. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. King Eric paced the length of his dimly lit throne room, his mind a storm of frustration and rage. The dark stone walls, adorned with ominous tapestries depicting his rise to power, seemed to close in around him. Shadows danced in the flickering torchlight, casting eerie shapes that matched the turmoil in his heart. Suddenly, a chill swept through the room. The torches flickered violently, and the air grew dense with a palpable malevolence. Eric halted mid-stride, turning toward the source of the disturbance. Emerging from the darkness was a figure draped in flowing black robes, his face obscured by a hood. The Shadow King had arrived. "You summoned me," Eric said, his voice tinged with a mix of defiance and fear. The Shadow King stepped forward, his presence filling the room with an oppressive weight. "Your failure is intolerable," he hissed, his voice echoing as though it came from the depths of a cavern. Eric's fists clenched at his sides. "I underestimated their resolve. They conjured more magic than we anticipated." The Shadow King's eyes glowed with an inner fire beneath his hood. "More magic? You were meant to crush their spirit, not fuel it. How could you allow such a resurgence?" Eric took a step back, struggling to maintain his composure under the Shadow King's withering gaze. "The pendant, the girl, she wields power I did not foresee, and Alden, he's proven more resourceful than I gave him credit for." A dark laugh escaped the Shadow King's lips, sending shivers down Eric's spine. "Excuses, Eric? I entrusted you with my power and you squander it against mere mortals and fledgling mages?" Eric swallowed hard, anger boiling beneath his fear. "They had allies I did not account for, dwarves, spectral warriors." The Shadow King's eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. "Then you must adapt. We cannot afford another setback." Eric straightened, determination hardening his features. "I will not fail again. Give me more of your power. Grant me what I need to obliterate them." The Shadow King's gaze bore into him for a long moment before he spoke again, each word dripping with menace. "You tread on thin ice, Eric, but very well. You shall have your chance." Eric nodded stiffly as he felt a surge of dark energy begin to coil around him like serpents, binding him tighter to the malevolent force that had sustained his reign. "Remember," the Shadow King whispered, "there are no more second chances." The Shadow King loomed over Eric, his presence casting a dark pall over the room. The oppressive silence was broken only by the crackle of torches sputtering in their sconces. Eric's breath quickened, but he stood firm, waiting for the plan that would ensure his dominion over Lysaria. "You will draw them out," the Shadow King began, his voice a sinister whisper that seemed to reverberate through the stone walls. "Lure them from their stronghold at Shadowspire Keep." Eric nodded, hanging on every word. "How do you propose we accomplish this?" The Shadow King's eyes glinted with a malevolent light. "You will spread rumors of a vulnerable village, one they cannot ignore. They believe themselves protectors. Use their nobility against them." Eric's mind raced, piecing together the strategy. "And when they leave the keep?" "Strike hard and fast," the Shadow King continued. "Send your most loyal and vicious soldiers to raise the village. Ensure news reaches their ears. Their hearts will lead them into the trap." Eric's lips curled into a grim smile. "Once they are out in the open, we can crush them with our full might." "Precisely," the Shadow King said, his tone dripping with dark satisfaction. "But you must ensure they believe they are rescuing innocents. The element of surprise is crucial." Eric bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. "I will ensure they take the bait." The Shadow King stepped closer, his form towering over Eric's now submissive posture. "While they are occupied with saving what they think are helpless villagers, you will lead an assault on Shadowspire Keep itself. Capture or kill Syrala, the girl with the pendant, is your primary target." Eric's eyes gleamed with renewed fervor. "And once we have her?" The Shadow King's voice lowered to a menacing growl. "Bring her to me. Her power must be harnessed or extinguished." Eric nodded again, feeling the weight of his mission settle upon him like a mantle of darkness. "It shall be done." The Shadow King stepped back into the shadows, his form beginning to dissipate into the air like smoke. "Remember, Eric," he warned as he faded from sight, "failure is not an option." As the last traces of the Shadow King's presence vanished from the room, Eric straightened and took a deep breath, already planning how to execute this sinister scheme that would finally put an end to his enemies and secure his unchallenged rule over Lysaria. He turned on his heel and strode out of the throne room with renewed purpose, ready to set his Dark Lord's plan into motion. King Eric emerged from the throne room, his face a mask of determination. He strode through the dimly lit corridors of his castle, passing guards who straightened at his approach. His mind raced with the Shadow King's instructions. "Take the castle and bring me the heir. You can kill the rest." He found Captain Draven in the war room, hunched over a map of Lysaria. The captain looked up as Eric entered, eyes sharp with attention. "Captain," Eric barked, "we move at dawn. Prepare your men." Draven nodded, his expression hardening. "What's the target, Your Majesty?" "Shadowspire Keep," Eric replied, pointing to its location on the map. "We will lure their forces out with a feigned attack on a nearby village. Once they take the bait and leave their stronghold, we strike." Draven's eyes flickered with understanding. "And our orders for the keep?" Eric's gaze darkened as he repeated the Shadow King's directive. "Take the castle and bring me the heir. You can kill the rest." Draven's mouth set into a grim line. "Understood, Your Majesty. I'll mobilize our best units for this mission." Eric's hand clenched into a fist over the map. "Ensure there are no mistakes, Captain. Syrala must be captured alive and brought to me immediately." The captain bowed slightly before turning to issue commands to his subordinates. Eric watched as Draven relayed orders with military precision, each soldier snapping to attention and moving swiftly to prepare for the impending assault. As dawn approached, the castle buzzed with activity. Armored soldiers lined up in formation in the courtyard, their faces set with resolve. War horses snorted and stamped their hooves, sensing the tension in the air. Eric mounted his black stallion, his eyes scanning his assembled forces. The plan was set in motion. Soon, Shadowspire Keep would fall, and Syrala would be in his grasp. Captain Draven rode up beside him, his helmet under one arm. "The men are ready, Your Majesty." Eric nodded curtly. "Then let us begin." With a swift kick to his horse's sides, Eric led his army out of the castle gates and onto the path that would lead them to Shadowspire Keep and to Syrala. The soldiers moved like a well-oiled machine, banners flying high as they marched under the first light of dawn. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but Eric felt no fear. only a cold determination to see this through. "Remember," he called back to his men as they plunged into the trees, "take the castle and bring me the heir. Kill anyone who stands in your way." Eric's army thundered through the forest, hooves pounding against the earth as they made their way towards the unsuspecting villages. Captain Draven rode at the head of the formation, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of resistance. Behind him, soldiers remained vigilant, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, back at Shadowspire Keep, Sir Alden stood in the courtyard, surrounded by his trusted knights and advisors. The air buzzed with urgency as they prepared to dispatch their forces to protect the villages from Eric's oncoming assault. "We'll split our forces. Sir Robert, you take half of our knights and head to Eldergrove. Torin, you lead your dwarves to Chiladris. Protect the villagers at all costs." Sir Robert and Torin both gave sharp nods before turning to rally their respective troops. The courtyard filled with the sounds of armor clinking and horses snorting as the strike forces prepared to ride out. Alden turned to Raelin and Thorian, who stood nearby with grim expressions. "We must fortify Shadowspire Keep as best we can with the forces we have left," Alden said. "Eric won't hesitate to attack us once he realizes we're vulnerable." Raelin nodded in agreement. "We'll focus on reinforcing the northern wall and setting up defensive positions around the main gate," Thorian added, "and we'll need to keep Syrala protected at all costs. Her power is crucial in this fight." Alden's jaw tightened as he thought of Syrala resting inside the keep, still recovering from her injuries, but determined to fight for Lysaria's future. "I'll ensure she's guarded around the clock," he said firmly. With that, Sir Robert and Torin led their strike forces out of Shadowspire Keep, riding with urgency towards Eldergrove and Chiladris. As they disappeared into the forest, Alden felt a pang of worry for his men and for the villagers they were rushing to protect. Back inside Shadowspire Keep, Alden directed his remaining knights to bolster their defenses. He knew they were now operating at reduced strength, but he couldn't afford to let fear or doubt take hold. "Stay vigilant," he commanded his men as they moved to fortify the walls and set up barricades around the gates. "Eric's forces will come for us eventually. We must be ready." As his knights worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses, Alden took a moment to glance up at the darkening sky. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he knew that every decision he made was crucial in this battle for Lysaria's survival. Inside the keep, Raelin and Thorian coordinated efforts with Merrin and Syrala, ensuring that every possible measure was taken to prepare for what lay ahead. Despite their reduced numbers, there was a sense of unity and determination among those who remained at Shadowspire Keep. A shared resolve to stand firm against King Eric's dark forces and protect their land at all costs. As Shadowspire Keep buzzed with the preparations for defense, the sentries stationed at the lookout towers suddenly spotted movement in the distance. A figure appeared, darting through the trees with an agility that was unmistakable. One of the sentries, a keen-eyed archer, quickly recognized the distinctive green cloaks and flowing movements. "The woodelves," he called down to those below. "The woodelves have arrived." Sir Alden, who had been overseeing the fortifications, immediately looked up, relief mixed with anticipation in his eyes. He knew that the arrival of the woodelves could turn the tide in their favor. Within moments, a contingent of woodelf warriors emerged from the forest, led by Eldrin and Leora. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their steps almost silent despite their swift pace. The archers among them held their bows at the ready, while others carried finely crafted blades that shimmered with enchantments. Eldrin approached Alden, offering a respectful nod. "We came as soon as we received word," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "How can we assist?" Alden gestured towards the northern wall. "Our defenses are stretched thin," he explained. "We need every able fighter to help reinforce our positions and prepare for Eric's assault." Leora stepped forward, her eyes scanning the bustling courtyard. "Our healers will assist with tending to your wounded," she offered, "and our archers will take up positions along your walls." "Thank you," Alden replied sincerely. "Your aid is invaluable." As Eldrin began directing his warriors to various defensive points around Shadowspire Keep, Leora moved towards the makeshift infirmary where Raelin and Marin were coordinating medical efforts. "We're here to help," Leora said softly to Marin, who was bandaging a knight's wound. Marin looked up, gratitude evident on her face. "Thank you, Leora," she replied. "We could use all the help we can get." The wood elf healers quickly integrated into the efforts, their knowledge of herbs and natural remedies proving to be a great asset. Meanwhile, Eldrin's archers took their places on the walls, blending seamlessly into their surroundings as they prepared to rain down arrows upon any approaching enemy. Alden watched as the combined forces of humans and wood elves worked together in harmony. The presence of these allies bolstered his confidence and filled him with renewed hope. Shadowspire Keep was now fortified not just by stone and steel, but by a unity of purpose and strength drawn from diverse corners of Lysaria, a testament to their shared resolve against King Eric's tyranny. In the village of Eldergrove, the clash of steel against steel rang out as Torin led his dwarves in fierce combat against King Eric's soldiers. The dwarves, stout and formidable, moved with surprising speed and precision. Torin's warhammer smashed through enemy lines, each blow leaving a trail of broken armor and shattered bones. "Hold the line," Torin bellowed, rallying his warriors, "for the Iron Fist clan." The dwarves responded with a roar, their axes and hammers swinging in unison. They fought with the ferocity of their ancestors, driven by a deep-seated desire to reclaim their homeland and honor. Around them, villagers armed with pitchforks and makeshift weapons joined the fray, inspired by the dwarves' bravery. Nearby, a young dwarf named Brack took down an enemy soldier with a swift axe strike to the leg before delivering a finishing blow to the helmet. He glanced around to see Torin fighting off 3 soldiers at once, each strike of his hammer resonating like thunder. "Torin," Brack shouted over the din of battle, "more soldiers are coming from the east." Torin grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the battlefield. "Form up," he ordered, signaling his warriors to regroup and prepare for the next wave. Meanwhile, in the village of Shiladras, Sir Alden led his knights into battle against another contingent of Eric's forces. The knights moved with disciplined precision, their swords cutting through enemy ranks. Alden himself fought at the forefront, his newly enchanted blade gleaming with every swing. "Press forward," Alden commanded, urging his men to advance. The knights pushed ahead, their shields interlocking to form an impenetrable wall. They cut down soldiers left and right, their movements fluid and deadly. Among them was Sir Robert, who fought valiantly beside Alden, his strikes precise and lethal. Alden caught sight of a group of villagers cornered by Eric's men. With a determined shout, he broke formation and charged towards them, his blade slicing through the air. "Protect the villagers," he called out to his knights. Sir Robert and a few others followed suit, engaging the enemy soldiers with renewed vigor. Alden reached the cornered villagers and quickly dispatched their attackers, offering them reassurance as they retreated to safety. The battlefield was chaotic, but Alden's leadership shone through. He coordinated his men with clear commands and swift decisions, ensuring they maintained control despite the overwhelming odds. Back in Eldergrove, Torin's dwarves held their ground against the relentless assault. Brack fought fiercely beside his comrades, each swing of his axe driven by determination. The tide of battle seemed ever-changing, but one thing remained constant: the resolve of those fighting against King Eric's tyranny. Torin's dwarves were beginning to show signs of fatigue, their movements slowing as the relentless assault from Eric's soldiers continued. Sweat dripped down their brows, mingling with the blood and grime of battle. The clash of steel and the cries of the wounded filled the air, a cacophony of chaos and desperation. "Hold strong," Torin shouted, his voice a beacon of determination amidst the turmoil. He swung his hammer with renewed vigor, taking down another enemy soldier who dared to approach. Brack, fighting beside him, gritted his teeth as he parried an incoming blow with his axe. "We can't keep this up forever," he muttered, casting a worried glance at Torin. "We don't have to," Torin replied, his eyes glinting with resolve. "We just need to hold out until Alden arrives." In Shiladras, Sir Alden and his knights were making steady progress. The enemy lines were beginning to falter under their relentless assault. Alden's enchanted blade cut through armor and flesh with ease. "Forward," he commanded, urging his knights onward. They moved as one, a wall of steel and determination pushing back against Eric's forces. Sir Robert fought fiercely at Alden's side, his strikes precise and deadly. He glanced at Alden, admiration in his eyes. "We're turning the tide," he shouted over the din of battle. Alden nodded, but his expression remained focused. "Stay vigilant," he warned. "The battle is far from over." Back in Eldergrove, the villagers were fighting valiantly alongside the dwarves. Their makeshift weapons were no match for the enemy's steel. A young woman named Alara swung a broken piece of wood at an approaching soldier, her face set in grim determination. She was knocked back by the force of his blow, but before he could strike again, Brack intervened, cutting him down with a swift strike of his axe. "Thank you," Alara gasped, struggling to catch her breath. Brack offered her a grim smile. "We're all in this together," he said before turning back to the fray. The battle raged on, each side giving their all in a desperate bid for victory. The outcome hung in the balance, but amid the chaos and bloodshed, one thing was clear. The people of Lysaria would not go down without a fight. The sounds of battle echoed through both villages as Torrin's dwarves and Sir Alden's knights fought valiantly against King Eric's forces. Despite their exhaustion and overwhelming odds, the fate of Lysaria hung in the balance, but hope flickered amidst the chaos as they fought for their freedom. The battle in Eldergrove showed no signs of abating. Torrin's hammer clashed against the enemy's sword, sending sparks flying. He could feel his muscles protesting from the continuous exertion, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing on the fight at hand. Around him, his fellow dwarves fought with a ferocity that matched his own, their war cries echoing through the beleaguered village. Alara, standing her ground despite her earlier injury, had taken up a fallen soldier's sword. She swung it with newfound determination, every swing an act of defiance against King Eric's tyranny. "For Eldergrove," she cried out, rallying the villagers around her. On the other side of the battlefield, Sir Alden's knights advanced steadily. The enemy's formation began to break under their relentless assault. Alden's eyes scanned the battlefield, looking for any sign of weakness to exploit. "Push forward," Alden bellowed, leading by example as he cut down another foe with his enchanted blade. His knights followed suit, their resolve unshaken despite the chaos surrounding them. Sir Robert stayed close to Alden's side, his shield raised to deflect an incoming arrow. "We're making progress," he called out. Alden nodded curtly. "We need to break through their lines and reach Torrin and his dwarves," he said. In Chiladras, Raelin and Torrin continued their coordinated efforts against Eric's forces. Raelin's magic surged through the battlefield, creating barriers and launching energy bolts that scattered the enemy ranks. Torrin's hammer was a blur of motion as he led his dwarves in a fierce charge. "Raelin," Torrin called out over the din of battle. "We need to hold this position until Alden arrives." Raelin nodded, her face set in concentration as she summoned another spell. "We will," she replied confidently. "They'll be here soon." Back in Eldergrove, the tide of battle began to turn in favor of Alden's forces. The villagers and dwarves fought with renewed vigor, inspired by Alden's leadership and Alara's rallying cry. The enemy soldiers began to falter under their combined assault. Alden could see the opening they needed just ahead. "Now," he shouted, leading his knights in a final push to break through the enemy lines. With a roar of determination, Alden's knights surged forward, cutting down any who stood in their way. The path to Torrin and his dwarves was finally clear. "We've got them!" Sir Robert exclaimed as they reached Torrin's position. Torrin grinned despite the exhaustion evident on his face. "About time you showed up," he said with a chuckle. Alden clasped Torrin's arm firmly. "Let's finish this," he said. Together they turned to face what remained of King Eric's forces, ready to bring an end to this brutal confrontation once and for all. King Eric stood at the head of his remaining army, his cold, calculating eyes scanning the soldiers before him. They were battered, but not broken, still loyal to his command. The dark energy that had become a part of him crackled ominously, lending him an air of dread and foreboding. He raised his sword high, its blade glinting in the pale light. "To Shadowspire," he commanded, his voice echoing through the ranks. The soldiers, a mix of hardened veterans and fresh recruits, straightened their postures, gripping their weapons tighter. They knew the significance of this mission. Failure was not an option. The journey to Shadowspire was grueling. The terrain was unforgiving, and the soldiers marched in grim silence, their faces set with determination. As they neared the ancient fortress, Eric could feel the resistance's presence, an energy that opposed his dark magic. Upon reaching the outskirts of Shadowspire Keep, Eric wasted no time. He ordered his forces to spread out and surround the fortress. The siege began in earnest with a barrage of flaming arrows and heavy stones launched from catapults. Inside Shadowspire Keep, Sir Alden and Torin quickly organized their defenses. Archers lined the battlements, returning fire with precision. Dwarves manned the fortifications, their sturdy frames making them ideal for repelling assaults on the walls. "Hold your ground," Alden shouted as he deflected an incoming arrow with his shield. "We cannot let them breach these walls." Raelin and Thorian stood together at a vantage point within the keep, their combined magic creating protective barriers and launching counterattacks against Eric's forces. Syrala's pendant glowed brightly as she channeled her magic into supporting their efforts. The battle raged on fiercely. Eric's soldiers pushed forward relentlessly, using ladders and siege towers to scale the walls. Alden's knights met them with swords and shields, cutting down enemies as they attempted to gain a foothold. Torin led a group of dwarves in a charge to reinforce a weakened section of the wall. Their hammers and axes swung with deadly precision, sending attackers tumbling back down to the ground below. "Push them back!" Torin roared, his voice booming over the clamor of battle. Despite their best efforts, Eric's army continued to press on. The siege weapons hammered away at Shadowspire's defenses, creating breaches that were quickly filled by defenders rushing to plug the gaps. As night fell over the battlefield, both sides showed no signs of relenting. The fight for Shadowspire had only just begun. In the thick of the battle, Shadowspire Keep's defenders fought valiantly against King Eric's relentless assault. Flames flickered along the battlements, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. Syrala stood amidst the chaos, her pendant radiating a fierce light that pulsed with each heartbeat. She focused her energy, conjuring a shield to protect a group of archers who were under heavy fire. "Hold the line," she yelled, her voice strong despite the strain in her features. Marin, close by, watched with concern as Syrala's strength seemed to wane. He tightened his grip on his sword and stepped forward, determined to keep the enemy at bay. "We need more support on the east wall," Sir Alden shouted as he parried an incoming blow and countered with a swift strike that sent an attacker sprawling. Torin, his face set in grim determination, rallied a squad of dwarves. "With me! We can't let them through!" He led them to where the wall had been breached, their weapons clashing with those of Eric's soldiers in a brutal melee. Thorian and Raelin combined their magical prowess to create barriers and launch counterattacks. Thorian's hands moved in intricate patterns as he summoned gusts of wind to knock enemies off balance. Raelin focused his energy into bolts of lightning that crackled through the air, striking down attackers with pinpoint accuracy. A particularly fierce wave of Eric's soldiers surged forward, attempting to overrun the defenders at a critical breach. Alden noticed their intent and barked orders to his knights. "Form up, shield wall," he commanded. The knights moved swiftly, locking their shields together and presenting an impenetrable front. Syrala's pendant glowed even brighter as she drew deeper on its power. She extended her hand toward the enemy soldiers and unleashed a wave of energy that knocked them back, buying precious moments for Alden's forces to regroup. In the midst of this turmoil, King Eric observed from a distance. His eyes narrowed as he saw the resistance put up by Shadowspire's defenders. He raised his hand, and dark tendrils of energy began to coalesce around him. "Enough games," he muttered to himself before sending forth a powerful blast of dark magic aimed directly at Syrala and her companions. The blast struck with devastating force, shattering barriers and sending defenders sprawling. Alden shielded Syrala with his body as debris rained down around them. "We need to regroup inside," Torin shouted over the din, helping those who were still standing retreat into the keep's inner defenses. As they fell back into more fortified positions within Shadowspire Keep, Alden took stock of their situation. The battle was far from over, but they had managed to hold their ground for now. The defenders gathered their strength for what was sure to be another grueling confrontation with King Eric's forces. In this brief respite, Raelin turned to Syrala. Eric's entire army, a sea of darkened armor and wicked steel, converged on Shadowspire Keep. The ground trembled beneath the weight of marching soldiers, siege engines rolled into place, and archers nocked arrows, ready to rain death upon the defenders. King Eric stood at the forefront, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent as he surveyed the battlefield. Alden's forces, bolstered by knights, dwarves, and mages, braced themselves for the onslaught. The walls of Shadowspire were lined with archers and crossbowmen, their faces set in grim determination. In the courtyard below, Tauren led his dwarves in a fervent chant, their war cries echoing off the stone walls. "Stand firm," Alden shouted from atop the battlements. His voice carried strength and resolve, rallying his men as the enemy drew closer. The battle erupted with a deafening roar as Eric's soldiers surged forward. The first wave clashed against Alden's defenses like a storm crashing upon rocky shores. Swords rang against shields, and screams of pain filled the air. The archers loosed their arrows in synchronized volleys, creating deadly arcs that cut down advancing foes. Syrala stood beside Merrin and Raelin at a strategic point along the wall. Her pendant blazed with an ethereal light as she summoned protective barriers to shield her comrades from incoming projectiles. Raelin unleashed torrents of lightning that arced through enemy ranks, leaving charred bodies in their wake. Tauren led a countercharge from a breach in the wall, his warhammer swinging with brutal efficiency. His dwarves followed suit, their axes cleaving through armor and bone alike. The ground became slick with blood as they pushed back against Eric's relentless forces. Alden descended from the battlements to join the fray on the ground level. His presence inspired those around him to fight harder, refusing to yield even an inch to their oppressors. King Eric advanced through the chaos, dark magic swirling around him like a malevolent aura. He cast devastating spells that tore through Alden's ranks, creating gaping holes in their defenses. Thorian met Eric's gaze from across the battlefield and began weaving powerful counterspells to mitigate the damage. As the battle raged on without respite, it became clear that both sides were committed to fighting to their last breath. Shadowspire Keep's defenders held fast against overwhelming odds, drawing strength from each other and their shared cause. The clash of armies filled every corner of Shadowspire Keep, a brutal symphony of war that showed no sign of abating anytime soon. Amid the cacophony of battle, a powerful roar echoed through the courtyard, causing heads to turn. Emerging from the thick of combat, King Eric wielded dark energy like a whip, slicing through friend and foe alike. His eyes locked onto Syrala, recognizing her as the pivotal force behind the resistance. Syrala's pendant flared with intense light as she focused her energy, preparing to counter Eric's attack. The air crackled with tension as the two forces of magic clashed, sending shockwaves that rippled through the battlefield. Merrin stood beside her, eyes wide with determination, ready to defend her at all costs. "Stay close," Syrala shouted to Merrin, her voice barely audible over the din of battle. Merrin nodded, his grip tightening on his sword as he faced the oncoming threat. Raelin joined them, his staff glowing with accumulated power. He muttered incantations under his breath, casting protective wards around their small group. Across the courtyard, Alden and Tauren fought valiantly against Eric's soldiers. Alden's sword moved like a blur, deflecting blows and striking with lethal precision. Tauren's warhammer swung in devastating arcs, each strike accompanied by a grunt of exertion and a spray of blood. "We need to hold this line," Alden yelled to his men, rallying them for another push. Tauren glanced over at Alden and gave a resolute nod before bellowing commands to his dwarves. The dwarves formed an impenetrable shield wall, bracing against the relentless assault of Eric's forces. Back on the battlements, Thorian and Raelin combined their magical prowess to create a barrier that absorbed incoming projectiles. Thorian's brow furrowed in concentration as he maintained the protective shield, while Raelin conjured fireballs that exploded among enemy ranks. "Focus your attacks on their siege engines," Thorian commanded, his voice strained from the effort. Raelin complied, sending fiery projectiles toward the massive wooden constructs that threatened to breach Shadowspire's walls. The engines burst into flames under her assault, causing chaos among Eric's troops. As the battle reached a fever pitch, Syrala took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her pendant shone brighter than ever before, its light enveloping her in a protective aura. She raised her hands and channeled her magic into a single powerful blast aimed directly at King Eric. Eric countered with dark energy of his own, but Syrala's attack overwhelmed him. He staggered back, momentarily dazed by the sheer force of her power. "Now!" Raelin shouted, seizing the opportunity to press their advantage. The defenders of Shadowspire rallied around Syrala's display of strength, pushing back against Eric's forces with renewed vigor. Amidst the chaos and clashing steel, hope began to flicker within the hearts of those fighting for Lysaria's freedom. Eric, still reeling from Syrala's powerful attack, stumbled back, clutching his chest where the light had struck him. His face twisted in fury as he summoned more dark energy, his eyes locking onto Syrala with malevolent intent. But before he could unleash another wave of destruction, Alden and Torin broke through the enemy lines and charged at him. "Keep pushing," Alden shouted to his knights as they cut a path toward Eric. Torin's warhammer smashed into the ground, sending a shockwave that knocked several of Eric's soldiers off their feet. The dwarves surged forward, taking advantage of the disruption to reinforce their position. Syrala felt the strain of her magic, but remained steadfast. She glanced at Marin and Raelin, who were fending off enemies attempting to flank them. Raelin's staff crackled with energy as he cast spell after spell, each one expertly aimed to neutralize threats. "We're holding them off," Marin called out, parrying a blow and countering with a swift strike. Alden and Torin closed in on Eric, their weapons gleaming under the flickering light of battle. Eric snarled and released a torrent of dark energy toward them, but Alden's shield absorbed most of the impact. He pushed forward with determination, his eyes never leaving Eric's. "You won't win this," Alden declared, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Eric's eyes flashed with anger as he swung his sword in a vicious arc. Alden parried the blow, sparks flying from their clashing blades. Torin circled around, looking for an opening to strike. Syrala took a deep breath and gathered her remaining strength. She raised her hands again, ready to unleash another burst of magic. The pendant's glow intensified, casting long shadows across the battlefield. "Now or never," she whispered to herself, feeling the weight of her responsibility. Raelin sensed her intent and channeled his energy to bolster her magic. The combined power created a brilliant beam of light that shot toward Eric. The Dark King barely had time to react before the light enveloped him, forcing him to his knees. Eric screamed in rage and pain as the light seared through him. His soldiers faltered at the sight of their leader brought low by such power. Seizing the moment, Alden and Torin lunged forward, their weapons aimed for a decisive strike. But even as they closed in, Eric's resolve hardened. He summoned a final surge of dark energy, creating a shockwave that sent everyone around him sprawling. Alden hit the ground hard, but quickly regained his footing, eyes narrowing at the relentless king. "We need to end this," Raelin said urgently to Syrala, who nodded in agreement. The battle raged on around them, each side fighting with everything they had for the fate of Lysaria. The heavy gates of Shadowspire Keep finally collapsed with a deafening crash, the ancient wood splintering and iron hinges snapping under the relentless assault. Dust and debris filled the air, momentarily obscuring the brutal scene within the courtyard. Amidst the chaos, only a few warriors on both sides remained standing, their breath ragged and their movements slow from exhaustion. Alden, bloodied but unbowed, stood defiantly at the forefront, his sword still raised despite the toll the battle had taken on him. Beside him, Torin leaned heavily on his warhammer, his face grim yet resolute. On the opposite side, Eric's dark soldiers were equally worn, their armor dented and their weapons slick with blood. The ground between them was littered with fallen comrades and the detritus of battle, a testament. Syrala staggered forward, her pendant's glow dimming as she struggled to maintain her focus. Marin moved to support her, his own injuries evident in the way he winced with every step. Raelin, sweat trickling down his face, stood ready with his staff, eyes scanning for any lingering threats. A moment of tense silence hung in the air as both sides took stock of their situation. The collapse of the gates had shifted the momentum of the battle, but victory was still uncertain. "Hold your ground," Alden's voice rang out, commanding attention from his remaining knights and allies. They rallied around him, forming a protective line as they faced what remained of Eric's forces. Eric himself emerged from the dust cloud near the shattered gates, his expression twisted with rage and desperation. He brandished his dark sword, its edge gleaming malevolently even in the dim light. His eyes locked onto Syrala, recognizing her as the source of his suffering. With a guttural roar, Eric charged forward, determined to end it all in one final confrontation. Alden met him head-on, their blades clashing once more in a shower of sparks. The remaining warriors on both sides watched with bated breath as their leaders fought for supremacy. Torrin joined Alden in engaging Eric's elite guards who moved to protect their king. His warhammer swung with deadly precision, each blow driving back those who dared approach. Meanwhile, Syrala and Raelin concentrated on bolstering their defenses with what little magic they had left. Syrala's hands trembled from exhaustion as she conjured protective barriers to shield her allies from incoming attacks. The courtyard had become a microcosm of the larger struggle for Lysaria, a clash not just of swords and spells, but of wills and destinies intertwined by fate. Steel clashed with steel as King Eric and Sir Alden circled each other, the remnants of the battle around them echoing in their ears. Eric's eyes blazed with cold fury, each strike of his sword calculated to bring Alden down. The knight, bruised and battered, fought back with a determination that burned brighter than ever. Each move he made was driven by the memories of those who had fallen, by the hope of Lysaria's freedom. "Yield!" Eric snarled, his voice laced with venom. "Never," Alden growled through gritted teeth, parrying a vicious blow that sent sparks flying. The duel had raged for what felt like hours, the courtyard of Shadowspire Keep now littered with bodies and the signs of their fierce struggle. Alden's armor was dented, his breath coming in ragged gasps, yet he stood tall, refusing to give in. Eric's own regal garments were torn and blood-stained, his face a mask of grim determination. Alden swung his sword in a wide arc, aiming for Eric's exposed side. The king deflected it just in time, countering with a brutal slash that cut into Alden's arm. Pain flared, but Alden pressed on, driven by an indomitable will. "You fight for a lost cause," Eric taunted as they locked blades once more. "I fight for justice," Alden replied, shoving Eric back with a surge of strength. The fight neared its end, both men knew it. Eric lunged forward with renewed aggression, his strikes growing desperate. Alden managed to deflect each one, his movements slowing but precise. A final clash sent them both staggering back, breathing heavily. Just then, an eerie chill filled the air. Shadows lengthened unnaturally across the ground as an oppressive presence descended upon the battlefield. Slowly, from the depths of darkness at the edge of the courtyard, figures began to materialize. The Shadow King emerged first, his form cloaked in swirling shadows that seemed to consume light itself. His eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence as he surveyed the scene. Behind him, undead knights clad in ancient armor appeared one by one, their eyes hollow and lifeless, yet burning with an unnatural fire. Alden's heart sank at the sight, while Eric's expression twisted into a mixture of triumph and terror. The dark entity's presence cast a pall over the battlefield as if hope itself had been smothered. "We are not finished," Eric hissed through clenched teeth. Alden raised his sword once more. Defiance etched on his face, even as dread gnawed at him from within. The arrival of the Shadow King and his undead knights marked a new chapter in their struggle, a chapter fraught with darkness and peril beyond anything they had faced before. The warriors, battered and weary, stood in a ragged line. Each breath they took was labored, every muscle in their bodies screamed for respite. Blood and sweat mingled on their armor, and the ground beneath them was slick with the remnants of battle. Yet, despite their exhaustion, they held their ground, eyes fixed on the approaching figure of the Shadow King. The dark entity moved with a grace that belied his malevolent nature. Each step he took seemed to draw the very light from the world around him, casting everything in a shadowy gloom. The undead knights flanked him, their hollow eyes locked onto the living warriors with an unholy hunger. Alden's grip tightened around his sword hilt, knuckles white from the effort. He could feel the weight of his injuries pulling at him, but he refused to falter. His gaze flicked to King Eric, who had also paused to watch the Shadow King's approach. There was no alliance here, only mutual desperation. From the periphery of the battlefield came a new presence. Marin, Syrala, and the mages emerged from the shadows of the keep, their faces set with determination. Thorian led them, his blind eyes seemingly unseeing, yet filled with a deep sense of purpose. Raelin followed closely behind, his staff crackling with latent energy. Syrala's pendant glowed fiercely against her chest, casting an ethereal light that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. Marin stayed close to her side, his expression one of fierce protectiveness. The young mage's hands were already crackling with energy as he prepared for whatever might come next. "We must form a barrier," Thorian instructed sharply as they closed in on Alden and the others. Raelin nodded and began chanting under his breath, weaving intricate patterns in the air with his staff. The air shimmered around them as ancient runes formed a protective barrier between the living and the undead. Syrala stepped forward, raising her hands as she joined her magic with Raelin's. Her pendant pulsed in time with her heartbeats, amplifying her power and lending strength to the barrier. Marin placed himself between Syrala and any potential threat, ready to defend her with everything he had. Alden glanced over his shoulder at their approach and felt a spark of hope ignite within him. The reinforcements brought not just physical strength, but also a surge of morale that was desperately needed. The Shadow King halted just beyond the reach of their combined magic. His eyes glinted with amusement and disdain as he observed their efforts. "You think you can defy me?" His voice was a chilling whisper that seemed to seep into their very bones. Thorian stepped forward beside Alden, raising his chin defiantly despite his blindness. "We will not yield to darkness," he declared firmly. The two sides stood poised on the brink of another clash, each moment heavy with tension as they awaited the inevitable confrontation that would determine Lysaria's fate. With a gesture of his hand, the Shadow King sent his minions rushing forward. The ground trembled beneath the weight of their advance, an army of undead knights, driven by dark magic and malevolent intent. Their hollow eyes gleamed with unholy light as they surged toward the living defenders. Thorian and Raelin stood firm, their combined magic forming an impenetrable barrier. Runes glowed brightly in the air, shimmering with ancient power. The first wave of undead knights slammed into the barrier with a force that reverberated through the air, but the mages held their ground. Syrala's pendant blazed, feeding more energy into the protective shield. "Hold fast," Thorian commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. The undead knights clawed and hacked at the barrier, their weapons bouncing off harmlessly. The living warriors behind the mages watched with tense anticipation, knowing that their lives depended on the mages' strength and endurance. Then, more undead knights appeared on the horizon. Their numbers seemed endless, a tide of darkness threatening to overwhelm them all. The mages gritted their teeth and redoubled their efforts, but it was clear that they were being pushed to their limits. Just as despair began to creep into their hearts, a new light appeared on the battlefield. From seemingly nowhere, spectral warriors materialized among them. These were the warriors of the Veil, long-dead guardians summoned by Tauren's invocation. Their ghostly forms glowed with an ethereal light that contrasted sharply with the darkness of their enemies. The spectral warriors joined the fight without hesitation. They moved with fluid grace, wielding weapons forged from pure energy. Their strikes were swift and precise, cutting down undead knights with ease. The presence of these ancient guardians reinvigorated the defenders, filling them with renewed hope and determination. Alden rallied his men with a fierce cry. "For Lysaria," he shouted, charging forward to meet the enemy head-on. The living warriors surged behind him, their spirits bolstered by the arrival of their spectral allies. Steel clashed against steel as they fought side by side with the warriors of the Veil, turning what had seemed like an inevitable defeat into a hard-fought battle for survival. The battlefield became a maelstrom of magic and combat as living and spectral forces united against the undead horde. The tide began to shift in their favor as each fallen knight was met with unwavering resolve and unbreakable unity. A spectral knight with a crown of silver flames, the leader of the warriors of the Vale, advanced through the battlefield with commanding presence. His blade cut through the undead like a scythe through wheat. The light from his crown flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced around him, amplifying his ghostly visage. "Focus on the weak points," Alden barked, slashing at an undead knight's exposed joints. His men responded with disciplined precision. The knights and dwarves fought fiercely. Syrala stood behind the front lines, her eyes closed in concentration. The pendant around her neck pulsed with a steady rhythm, syncing with her heartbeat. She whispered incantations under her breath, weaving spells that bolstered the defenders and disrupted the enemy ranks. Raelin moved beside Thorian, their combined magic forming a powerful arcane barrier that repelled attacks. They exchanged a brief glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew that maintaining this shield was critical to their survival. Torin's voice boomed over the clamor of battle as he rallied his fellow dwarves. "For Shadowspire! For Lysaria!" His warhammer swung in wide arcs, smashing through undead armor and bone alike. Alden spotted an opening in the enemy lines and seized the moment. "Charge!" he roared, leading his knights in a decisive push. They crashed into the undead ranks with unstoppable force, breaking their formation and sending them reeling. Syrala's eyes snapped open as she sensed a shift in the battle's momentum. She raised her hands high, drawing on the pendant's power to summon a torrent of magical energy. The ground beneath the undead knights erupted in a cascade of earth and stone, toppling them and creating chaos in their ranks. "Now!" Thorian shouted, capitalizing on Syrala's spell. He and Raelin channeled their magic into a concentrated blast that shattered what remained of the enemy's defenses. The spectral warriors pressed their advantage, cutting down any undead who dared to stand against them. The tide of battle had turned decisively in favor of Lysaria's defenders. Amidst the fighting, Alden caught sight of King Eric's dark advisor standing atop a nearby hill, observing the battle with cold detachment. Alden's eyes narrowed with resolve as he pointed his sword towards the figure. "Push forward," he urged his men. The defenders surged ahead with renewed vigor, their spirits lifted by their growing success on the battlefield. With each step they took, they moved closer to securing victory for Lysaria and restoring hope to their beleaguered land. The battlefield lay strewn with the remnants of spectral warriors and shattered undead knights, each side having taken a heavy toll. The once fierce clashing of weapons and the roar of battle had given way to an eerie silence, punctuated only by the occasional groan of a fallen soldier or the hiss of dissipating magic. Most of the mages, their energy spent, had collapsed where they stood. Their once vibrant spells now flickered weakly, the magical barrier barely holding together. Thorian and Raelin leaned on each other for support, their breaths ragged and labored. In the midst of this devastation, only a few figures remained standing. The Shadow King loomed ominously at the center of the chaos, his presence exuding a palpable aura of malevolence. His dark cloak billowed in an unseen wind, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. He seemed almost untouched by the carnage around him, an island of darkness in a sea of fallen warriors. Facing him was the leader of the spectral knights, his crown of silver flames still flickering defiantly. Despite the toll the battle had taken on his ghostly form, he stood tall and resolute, his spectral sword gleaming with ethereal light. The air between them crackled with tension, a silent challenge hanging in the balance. Nearby, Syrala and Marin stood side by side. Syrala's face was pale but determined, her hands still clutching her pendant as it glowed with residual magic. Marin's expression mirrored hers, resolute yet tinged with exhaustion. He gripped his sword tightly, ready to defend Syrala at any cost. The ground trembled slightly as the Shadow King took a step forward, his gaze locking onto Syrala. "So, you are the one who dares to defy me," he intoned, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of darkness itself. Syrala raised her chin defiantly. "I am Syrala, heir to Lysaria," she declared, her voice steady despite her weariness, "and I will see this land freed from your tyranny." The Shadow King's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Bold words for one so young," he sneered, "but words alone will not save you." The leader of the spectral knights stepped between them, his sword raised in silent challenge. The two figures faced off, ancient magic and dark power clashing in an unseen battle of wills. Marin tightened his grip on his sword and glanced at Syrala. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Syrala nodded, determination hardening her features. "Ready." And so they stood together on that haunted battlefield, four figures amidst a landscape of ruin, each prepared to give everything for their cause. Thorian, drawing upon the last reserves of his strength, shouted out to Syrala, his voice echoing through the battlefield. "Now, Syrala, hold nothing back." The air crackled with energy as both sides unleashed their full power. Syrala's pendant blazed with a brilliant light, her magic intertwining with the ancient forces within the artifact. She raised her hands, and a surge of elemental energy burst forth, cascading toward the Shadow King in waves of fire, water, and lightning. Raelin, summoning every ounce of his remaining strength, channeled a tempest of wind and ice to bolster Syrala's assault. The ground around them erupted in a maelstrom of magical fury. Thorian joined in, his hands weaving intricate patterns as he cast spell after spell, each one adding to the growing onslaught against their dark foe. Neither side held anything back. The spectral knight's sword clashed with the Shadow King's dark blade, sending shockwaves through the air. Every strike from the spectral warrior was met with an equally powerful counter from the Shadow King. The sheer force of their confrontation caused the very ground beneath them to tremble and crack. Syrala's eyes glowed with determination as she poured her heart and soul into her magic. Her spells seemed to dance in perfect harmony with Thorian and Raelin's efforts. Yet, despite their combined might and relentless assault, the Shadow King appeared invulnerable. Dark energy swirled around him like a living armor, absorbing and deflecting their attacks. His laughter rang out over the din of battle, a cold and mocking sound that sent chills down their spines. "Is this all you have?" he taunted, raising his hand to summon a wave of darkness that surged forward to meet Syrala's magic head-on. The clash of energies created an explosion that lit up the battlefield like a second sun. But Syrala did not falter. She pushed harder, drawing even more power from her pendant. Thorian glanced at Raelin. Both mages shared a look of determination. They knew what was at stake and understood that they could not afford to hold anything back. Together, they redoubled their efforts. Spells of light and darkness collided in midair, creating a spectacular display of magical prowess. Each clash seemed to resonate with the very soul of Lysaria itself. Yet through it all, the Shadow King stood tall and unyielding, a dark titan amidst their storm of magic, his sinister smile never wavering. The battlefield roared with the clash of immense powers. Syrala's eyes blazed with fierce determination, the pendant around her neck pulsing in rhythm with her heart. She stepped forward, the ground beneath her feet cracking from the sheer force of her magic. Elemental energies swirled around her like a living tempest, fire and lightning merging into a chaotic symphony of destruction. Thorian and Raelin stood on either side of her, their own spells merging seamlessly with hers. Raelin's hands moved in complex patterns, conjuring gusts of wind and shards of ice that joined Syrala's elemental barrage. Thorian's voice echoed ancient incantations, weaving spells that fortified their combined assault. Despite their relentless efforts, the Shadow King remained a towering figure of malevolent power. His dark energy shielded him from their attacks, absorbing each blow and converting it into a mockery of their strength. With a wave of his hand, he sent tendrils of darkness slithering toward them, each one snapping with deadly intent. "Hold fast," Thorian commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Syrala gritted her teeth, pushing harder against the overwhelming darkness. Her pendant glowed brighter, its light fighting to pierce through the encroaching shadows. "We cannot let him win," she whispered fiercely to herself. The spectral knight continued to clash with the Shadow King, each strike shaking the very air around them. The knight's sword shimmered with an ethereal light, cutting through the darkness with every swing. Yet for every strike that landed, the Shadow King seemed to grow stronger, feeding off their despair and fear. Marin, standing just behind Syrala, watched in awe and terror as the battle unfolded. He could see the strain on Syrala's face and knew she was giving everything she had. He reached out to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You can do this," he said softly. With renewed determination, Syrala summoned another wave of energy from her pendant. It surged forward like a tidal wave, crashing against the Shadow King's defenses with unparalleled force. The air crackled with raw power as fire met darkness in a violent explosion. Raelin channeled his magic into a focused beam of icy wind that struck at the core of the Shadow King's shield. Thorian's incantations grew louder and more desperate as he poured his remaining strength into breaking through their enemy's defenses. For a brief moment, it seemed as though they might succeed. The dark energy around the Shadow King flickered and wavered under their combined assault. But then he laughed, a cold, chilling sound that echoed through the battlefield like nails on a chalkboard. "Fools," he sneered, his eyes glowing with unholy light. "Your efforts are futile." Syrala's heart sank as she saw the darkness beginning to regroup and push back against their magic. She felt exhaustion creeping in, but refused to give up. "We need more power," Thorian shouted over the din. Syrala closed her eyes briefly, searching deep within herself for any remaining reserves of strength. She could feel Merrin's supportive presence beside her and knew she wasn't alone in this fight. Drawing upon every ounce of courage and willpower she possessed, Syrala opened her eyes once more, determined not to let Lysaria fall into darkness without giving everything she had to save it. The spectral knight staggered, clutching a wound that pulsed with a ghostly light. He approached Thorian, his voice strained and barely audible. "Thorian," he rasped, "have you not seen it yet?" Thorian's eyes narrowed in confusion. "Seen what?" The knight's ethereal form flickered as he leaned closer. Marin is the brother of Syrala." Thorian's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying?" "Only together," the knight continued, his voice growing weaker. "Only together can they unlock the full power of the pendant." Thorian's mind raced as he glanced towards Syrala and Marin. The pieces began to fall into place, the bond they shared, the way their strengths complemented each other. It had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. He turned back to the spectral knight, whose form was now fading rapidly. "Are you certain?" The knight nodded slowly. "It is their destiny. Lysaria's hope lies with them." With that, the spectral warrior dissolved into a wisp of light, leaving Thorian standing amidst the chaos. Thorian's gaze shifted to Marin. The revelation hit him like a thunderbolt. They needed to act on this knowledge immediately if they were to stand any chance against the Shadow King. With newfound urgency, Thorian rushed towards Syrala and Marin. "Marin!" he called out over the din of battle. Marin turned, confusion etched on his face. "What is it?" "There's no time to explain everything," Thorian said hurriedly. "But you and Syrala, you're siblings." Syrala looked up in shock, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What?" "The pendant's true power can only be unlocked by both of you together," Thorian explained, his eyes pleading for them to understand. Marin glanced at Syrala, disbelief and hope mingling in his expression. He took her hand firmly in his own. "We'll do it together." Syrala nodded, determination burning in her eyes once more. Thorian stepped back as Syrala and Marin joined hands, focusing their combined energies on the pendant. The air around them began to vibrate with a new intensity as their powers merged. The pendant glowed brighter than ever before, its light piercing through the darkness with renewed strength. And for the first time since the battle began, hope surged within Thorian's heart. Thorian stepped back, his eyes never leaving Syrala and Marin. As their hands clasped, the pendant's light intensified, spreading warmth and hope through the air. The combined power of the siblings began to ripple outward, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Marin tightened his grip on Syrala's hand, feeling an electric surge course through him. "We're doing this," he whispered, his voice resolute. Syrala nodded, her face set with determination. "Together." The pendant pulsed in rhythm with their hearts, its glow now a brilliant blaze that illuminated the entire battlefield. The knights and dwarves paused in their combat, awestruck by the radiant display of power. Sir Alden, battling a shadowy figure nearby, stole a glance at the siblings. "By the gods," he muttered under his breath, redoubling his efforts against the dark foe. His renewed vigor was mirrored by those around him. The light seemed to instill fresh courage in every warrior present. Raelin stood with Torin at the keep's entrance, both watching the scene unfold with guarded hope. "This might be it," Raelin said quietly. Torin grunted in agreement, his grip tightening on his axe. "If they can harness it fully?" The ground beneath Syrala and Merrin began to tremble slightly as they channeled their energy into the pendant. The light from the pendant flared even brighter, creating a protective dome around them that repelled any dark forces attempting to breach it. Suddenly, an intense surge of energy erupted from the pendant, blasting outward in all directions. The wave of power washed over friend and foe alike. Those aligned with darkness recoiled in pain, while allies felt a rejuvenating strength. Thorian shielded his eyes against the brilliance, but couldn't suppress a triumphant smile. This was the turning point they desperately needed. The dark creatures summoned by King Eric faltered under the onslaught of light. Shadows hissed and evaporated into nothingness as if scorched by a divine flame. Even the remaining horsemen hesitated, their malevolent presence wavering against this newfound force. Syrala's eyes locked onto Merrin's as they continued to focus their combined energies into sustaining and amplifying the pendant's power. There was no fear now, only purpose. "Keep going," Thorian shouted over the cacophony. "Don't let up." Syrala and Merrin poured everything they had into the pendant, feeling its energy resonate deeply within them, a bond forged not just by blood, but by destiny. And for that brief moment amid chaos and conflict, hope blazed like a star above Shadowspire Keep. Syrala and Merrin clasped the pendant together, their fingers intertwined around the ancient artifact. As they channeled their combined strength into the pendant, a blinding flash of energy erupted from its core. The light was so intense that it seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality, casting stark shadows across the battlefield. Every eye turned toward them, friend and foe alike, drawn by the overwhelming power emanating from the pendant. The siblings stood at the heart of this radiant storm, their expressions set with fierce determination. With a unified resolve, Syrala and Merrin directed their focus toward the Shadow King. The air around them crackled with raw magic as they aimed the pendant's formidable energy at their adversary. The light coalesced into a concentrated beam, surging forward with unstoppable force. The Shadow King, cloaked in dark malevolence, felt the full brunt of their combined attack. His eyes widened in shock as the beam struck him, tearing through his defenses with merciless precision. He staggered back, momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of their power. The battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat as everyone watched in stunned amazement. The dark creatures that had been relentlessly advancing now hesitated, sensing their master's distress. Syrala and Merrin pressed on, refusing to relent. They poured every ounce of their strength into the pendant, maintaining the relentless assault on the Shadow King. The light around them intensified further, its brilliance almost blinding. King Eric, witnessing this display of power from his distant vantage point, felt a chill run down his spine. For the first time in his reign of terror, he understood what true fear felt like. The Shadow King struggled to regain his footing under the onslaught, but found himself unable to withstand the relentless barrage. The light seemed to sear away at his very essence, unraveling the dark energies that had sustained him for so long. The power wielded by Syrala and Merrin was undeniable. The battlefield was a desolate expanse of ruin and devastation, littered with the fallen. Amidst the wreckage, only 3 figures remained upright: Merrin, Syrala, and the Shadow King. The siblings stood firm, their expressions hardened with resolve as they faced the embodiment of darkness. Merrin and Syrala exchanged a brief glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They summoned the last reserves of their strength, their hands gripping the pendant tighter. With a unified cry, they unleashed waves of energy that crackled through the air like a storm. The waves of energy surged toward the Shadow King, striking him with unrelenting force. His knights, once formidable and menacing, seemed to disintegrate into dust under the siblings' onslaught. Their dark forms crumbled and scattered in the wind, leaving only their master to face the wrath of Syrala and Merrin. This battle of wills was terrible to behold. The air hummed with raw power, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The very sky seemed to darken in response to the clashing energies. The Shadow King struggled against the torrent of light, his form flickering as if caught between realms. For a moment, it appeared as though he might succumb. He fell to the ground, his body collapsing under the weight of the siblings' relentless attack. A hush fell over the battlefield as hope flickered in the hearts of those who watched from afar. But then, with an agonizing slowness that spoke of sheer willpower and malevolent determination, the Shadow King began to rise. His movements were deliberate and measured, each step forward fueled by an ancient and dark resolve. As he stood upright once more, he reached for his blade. The weapon gleamed with a sinister light as he drew it from its sheath. The blade seemed to absorb the surrounding darkness, its edge sharp enough to cut through reality itself. The Shadow King's eyes burned with an unholy fire as he faced Syrala and Merrin once more. The siblings did not waver. They prepared for what would come next, their hearts pounding, but their spirits unbroken. The final confrontation loomed before them, a clash that would determine the fate of Lysaria. They tightened their grip on the pendant once more, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead in this terrible battle of wills. The air crackled with tension as Syrala and Merrin struggled to keep the Shadow King at bay. Their combined magic formed a radiant barrier, pushing against the dark energy that threatened to consume them. Sweat dripped from their brows, their faces etched with determination and exhaustion. A few paces away, Sir Alden lay on the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Pain coursed through his body, but a spark of resolve ignited within him. With a groan, he forced himself to move, his muscles protesting with every effort. His enchanted sword lay just out of reach, its blade glinting with a faint, otherworldly light. Alden's fingers brushed against the hilt, and he grasped it with a renewed sense of purpose. Gritting his teeth, he staggered to his feet, drawing strength from a reservoir he hadn't known existed. His vision blurred for a moment before sharpening with singular focus on the Shadow King. The siblings continued their desperate assault, unaware of Alden's struggle behind them. The Shadow King's attention remained fixed on Syrala and Merrin, his malevolent gaze locked onto the source of the light that challenged his darkness. With a silent prayer to the ancient guardians of Lysaria, Alden tightened his grip on the sword. Each step he took was heavy with determination and resolve. He moved with the stealth and precision of a knight trained for such moments. As he drew closer, the air around him seemed to shimmer with anticipation. The enchanted sword pulsed in his hand, resonating with the latent power that coursed through it. Alden's eyes never left his target. He could see the faint outlines of runes glowing along the blade's edge. The Shadow King raised his own weapon, preparing to strike down Syrala and Merrin in one final blow. In that instant, Alden surged forward with a burst of speed and strength born of desperation and valor. With all his might, he swung the enchanted sword in a wide arc. The blade met its mark with unerring precision. A sickening sound filled the air as metal sliced through flesh and bone. The Shadow King's head separated cleanly from his shoulders, tumbling to the ground in a grotesque dance of dark energy. His body stood for a moment longer before crumpling lifelessly beside it. Syrala and Merrin turned in shock, their eyes widening as they took in the scene before them. Alden stood over the fallen foe, chest heaving with exertion, but eyes blazing with triumph. The battlefield fell into an eerie silence as realization dawned upon them all. The Shadow King had been vanquished by Sir Alden's final act of bravery. The battlefield, once a cacophony of chaos, fell into an almost surreal stillness. Alden's chest heaved as he fought to steady his breath, his eyes locked on the lifeless form of the Shadow King. The enchanted sword, now dripping with dark ichor, seemed to hum in approval, its glow dimming as the immediate threat dissipated. Syrala and Merrin exchanged a glance of both relief and disbelief. Merrin moved first, rushing to Alden's side, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and concern. "Sir Alden," Merrin's voice wavered slightly. "Are you all right?" Alden nodded weakly, allowing Merrin to support him as he stumbled back a few steps. "I'm fine," he managed between breaths. "We did it." Syrala approached more slowly, her pendant still glowing softly. The residual energy from their combined efforts lingered in the air, creating a sense of fragile peace. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against the pendant that had been their beacon through so many trials. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes met Alden's with gratitude that words could not fully express. Before they could fully absorb the moment, Raelin and Thorian emerged from the shadows of the forest, their expressions a blend of exhaustion and triumph. They had held off other threats, while Syrala and Merrin confronted the Shadow King directly. Thorian's keen eyes surveyed the scene quickly. "The Shadow King is defeated," he stated more than asked, his voice filled with a sense of finality. Raelin approached Alden and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your bravery has saved us all," he said solemnly. Alden shook his head. "It wasn't just me," he replied, glancing at Syrala and Merrin. "We did this together." Tauren appeared next, leading a group of weary but victorious dwarves. They had fought valiantly alongside Alden's forces to ensure no other dark creatures could interfere with Syrala's destiny.